Then perhaps, Mr. Holmes, you will be good enough to explain how it is that I have received a letter from him today."
Sherlock Holmes sprang out of his chair as if he had been galvanized. "What?" he roared.
"Yes, today."
She stood smiling, holding up a little slip of paper in the air. "May I see it?"
"Certainly."
He snatched it from his eagerness, and smoothing it out upon the table, he drew over the lamp and examined it intently. I had left my chair and was gazing at it over his shoulder. The envelope was a very coarse one, and was stamped with the Gravesend postmark, and with the date of that very day, or rather of the day before, for it was considerably after midnight.
"Coarse writing," murmured Holmes.
"Surely this is not your husband's writing, madam?"
"No, but the enclosure is."
"I perceive also that whoever addressed the envelope had to go and inquire as to the address."
"How can you tell that?"
"The name, you see, is in perfectly black ink, which had dried itself. The rest is of the greyish colour, which shows that the blotting paper had been used. If it had been written straight off, and then blotted, none would be in a deep black shade. This man has written the name, and there has been a pause before he wrote the address, which can only mean that he was not familiar with it. It is of course a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles. Let us now see the letter. Ah! There has been an enclosure here."
"Yes, there was a ring. His signet ring."
"And are you sure that it is your husband's hand?"
"One of his hands."
"One?"
"His hand when he wrote hurriedly. It is very unlike his usual writing, and yet I know it very well."
"Dearest, do not be frightened. All will come well. There is a huge error which may take some little time to rectify. Wait in patience. Neville." Written in pencil upon the fly leaf of a book, October size, no watermark. Posted today in Gravesend by a man with a dirty thumb. And the flap has been gummed, if I am not very much in error, by a person who had been chewing tobacco. And you have no doubt that it is your husband's hand, madam?"
"None. Neville wrote those words."
"And they were posted today at Gravesend? Well, Mrs. Sinclair, the clouds lighten, though I should not venture to say that the danger is over."
"But he must be alive, Mr. Holmes."
"Unless this is a clever forgery to put us on the wrong scent. The ring, after all, proves nothing. It may have been taken from him."
"No, no, it is his very own writing."
"Very well. It may, however, have been written on Monday, and only posted today."
"That is possible."
"If so, much may have happened between."
"Oh, you must not discourage me, Mr. Holmes. I know that all is well with him. There is so much keen sympathy between us that I should know if evil came upon him. On the very day that I saw him last, he cut himself in the bedroom, and yet in the dining-room rushed upstairs instantly with the utmost certainty that something had happened. Do you think that I would respond to such a trifle, and yet be ignorant of his death?"
"I have seen too much not to know the impression of a woman may be more valuable than the conclusion of an analytical reasoner. And in this letter you certainly have a very strong piece of evidence to corroborate your view. But if your husband is alive and able to write letters, why should he remain away from you?"
"I cannot imagine. It is unthinkable."
"And on Monday he made no remarks before leaving you?"
"No."
"And you were surprised to see him in Swandam Lane?"
"Very much so."
"Was the window open?"
"Yes."
"Then he might have called to you?"
"He might."
"He only, as I understand, gave an inarticulate cry?"
"Yes."
"A call for help, you thought?"
"Yes. He waved his hands."
"But it might have been a cry of surprise. Astonishment at the unexpected sight of you might have caused him to throw up his hands."
"It is possible."
"And you thought he was pulled back?"
"He disappeared so suddenly."
"He might have leapt back." "You did not see anyone else in the room?"
"No. But this horrible man confessed to have been there, and the Lascar was at the foot of the stairs."
"Quite so. Your husband, as far as you could see, had his ordinary clothes on?"
"But without his collar or tie. I distinctly saw his bare throat."
"Had he ever spoke of Swandam Lane?"
"Never."
"Had he ever showed any signs of taking opium?"
"Never."
"Thank you, Mrs. Sinclair. Those are the principal points about which I wish to be absolutely clear. We shall now have a little supper and then retire, for we may have a very busy day tomorrow." A large and comfortable double-bedded room had been placed at our disposal, and I was quickly between the sheets, for I was weary after my night of adventure. Sherlock Holmes was a man, however, who, when he had an unresolved problem upon his mind, would go for days and even for a week without rest, turning it over, rearranging his facts, looking at it from every point of view, until he had either fathomed it or convinced it himself that his data was insufficient. It was soon evident to me that he was now preparing for an all-night sitting. He took off his coat and waistcoat, put on a large blue dressing-gown, and then wandered about the room, collecting pillows from his bed and cushions from the sofa and armchairs. With these he constructed a sort of Eastern divan, upon which he had perched himself cross-legged, with an ounce of shag tobacco and a box of matches laid out in front of him. In the dim light of the lamp I saw him sitting there, an old briar pipe between his lips, his eyes fixed vacantly upon the corner of the ceiling, the blue smoke curling from him, silent, motionless, but the light shining upon his strong set aquiline features. So he sat as I dropped off to sleep, and so he sat when a sudden ejaculation caused me to wake up, and I found the summer sun shining into the apartment. The pipe was still between his lips, and the smoke still curled upwards. The room was full of a dense tobacco haze, but nothing remained of the heap of shag which I had seen upon the previous night. "Awake, Watson." "Yes." "Game for a morning drive?" "Certainly." "Then dress. No one is stirring yet, but I know where the stable boy sleeps, and we shall soon have the trap out." He chuckled to himself as he spoke. His eyes twinkled, and he seemed a different man to the sombre thinker of the previous night. As I dressed, I glanced at my watch. It was no wonder that no one was stirring. It was 25 minutes past 4. I had hardly finished when Holmes returned with the news that the boy was putting in the horse. "I want to test a little theory of mine," said he, pulling on his boots. "I think, Watson, that you are now standing in the presence of one of the most absolute fools in Europe. I deserve to be kicked from here to Charing Cross, but I think I have the key of the affair now." "And where is it?" I asked, smiling. "In the bathroom," he answered. "Oh yes, I am not joking," he continued, seeing my look of incredulity. "I have just been there, and I have taken it out, and I have got it in this Gladstone bag. Come on, my boy, and we shall see whether it have not fit the lock." We made our way downstairs as quietly as possible, and out into the bright morning sunshine. In the road stood our horse and trap, with the half-clad stable-boy waiting at the head. We both sprang in, and away we dashed down the London road. A few country carts were stirring, bearing in vegetables to the metropolis, but the lines of villas on either side were as silent and lifeless as some city in a dream. "It has been in some points a singular case," said Holmes, flicking the horse onto the gallop. "I confess that I have been as blind as a mole, but it is better to learn wisdom late than never to learn it at all. In town the earliest risers were just beginning to look sleepily from their windows as we drove through the streets of the Surrey side. Passing down the Waterloo Bridge Road, we crossed over the river, and dashing up Wellington Street, wheeled sharply to the right and found ourselves in Bow Street. Sherlock Holmes was well known to the force, and the 2 constables at the door saluted him. One of them held the horse's head, while the other led us in. "Who is on duty?" asked Holmes. "Inspector Bradstreet, sir." "Ah, Bradstreet. How are you?" A tall, stout official had come down the flagstone passage in a peaked cap and a froggy jacket. "I wish to have a quiet word with you, Bradstreet." "Certainly, Mr. Holmes. Step into my room here." It was a small office-like room, with a huge ledger upon the table, and a telephone projecting from the wall. The inspector sat down at the desk. "What can I do for you, Mr. Holmes?" "I called about that beggar man Boone, the one who was charged with being concerned in the disappearance of Mr. Neville Sinclair of Lee." "Yes, he was brought up and remanded for further inquiries." "So I heard." "You have him here?" "In the cells." "Is he quiet?" "Oh, he gives no trouble, but he is a dirty scoundrel." "Dirty?" "Yes. It is all we could do to make him wash his hands, and his face is as black as a tinker's. Well, once his case has been settled, he will give him a regular prison bath, and I think, if you will see him, you would agree that he needed it." "I should like to see him very much." "Would you? That is easily done. Come this way. You can leave your bag. Now I think that I'll take it." "Very good. Come this way, if you please." He led us down a passage, opened a barred door, passed down a winding stair, and brought us to a whitewashed corridor with a line of doors on each side. "The third on the right is his," said the inspector. "Here it is." He quietly shot back a panel in the upper part of the door, and glanced through. "He is asleep," said he. "You could see him very well." We both put our eyes to the grating. The prisoner lay with his face towards us in a very deep sleep, breathing slowly and heavily. He was a middle-sized man, coarsely clad as became his calling, with a coloured shirt protruding through the rent in his tattered coat. He was, as the inspector had said, extremely dirty, but the grime which covered his face could not conceal its repulsive ugliness. A broad wheal from an old scar ran right across it from eye to chin, and by its contraction it had turned up one side of the upper lip, so that 3 teeth were exposed in a perpetual snarl. A shock of very bright red hair grew low over his eyes and forehead. "He's a beauty, isn't he?" said the inspector. "He certainly needs a wash," remarked Holmes. "I had an idea that he might, and I took the liberty of bringing the tools with me." He opened the Gladstone bag as he spoke, and took out, to my astonishment, a very large bath sponge. "You are a funny one," chuckled the inspector. "Now, if you will have the great goodness to open that door very quietly, we will soon make him cut a much more respectable figure." "Well, I don't know why not," said the inspector. "He don't look a credit to the Bow Street cells, doesn't he?" He slipped his key into the lock, and we all very quietly entered the cell. The sleeper half turned, and then settled down once more into a deep slumber. Holmes stooped to the water jug, moistened his sponge, and then rubbed it twice vigorously across and down the prisoner's face. "Let me introduce you," he shouted, "to Mr. Neville Sinclair of Lee in the county of Kent." Never in my life have I seen such a sight. The man's face peeled off under the sponge like the bark from a tree. Gone was the coarse brown tint. Gone, too, was the horrid scar which had seemed a cross, and the twisted lip which had given the repulsed sneer to the face. A twitch brought away the tangled red hair, and there, sitting upon his bed, was a pale, sad-faced, refined man, black-haired and smooth-skinned, rubbing his eyes and staring about him with sleepy bewilderment. Then, suddenly realizing the exposure, he broke into a scream and threw himself down into his face to the pillow. "Great heavens!" cried the inspector. "'Tis indeed the missing man. I know him from the photograph." The prisoner turned away with the reckless air of a man who abandoned himself to his destiny. "Be it so," said he. "Pray, what am I charged with?" "If making away with Mr. Neville said—" "Oh, come on, you can't be charged with that unless they'll make a case of attempted suicide of it," said the inspector with a grin. "But I have been 27 years in the force, but this really takes the cake." "If I am Mr. Neville Sinclair, then it is obvious that no crime has been committed, and that therefore I am illegally detained." "No crime, but a very great error has been committed," said Holmes. "You would have done better to trust your wife." "It was not the wife, it was the children," groaned the prisoner. "God help me, I would not have them ashamed of their father. My God, what an exposure! What can I do?" Sherlock Holmes sat down beside him on the couch and patted him kindly on the shoulder. "If you leave it to a court of law to clear the matter up," said he, "of course you can hardly avoid publicity. On the other hand, if you can convince the police authorities that there is no possible case against you, I do not know that there is any reason that the details should find their way into the papers. Inspector Bradstreet would, I am sure, make notes upon anything which you might tell us and submit to the proper authorities. The case would then never go into court at all." "God bless you," cried the prisoner passionately. "I would have endured imprisonment, aye, even execution, rather than have let my miserable secret as a family blot to my children. You are the first who have ever heard my story. My father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield, where I received an excellent education. I travelled in my youth, took to the stage, and finally became a reporter on an evening paper in London. One day my editor wished to have a series of articles upon begging in the metropolis, and I volunteered to supply them. That was the point from which upon all my adventures started. It was only by trying begging as an amateur that I could get facts upon to which to base my articles. When an actor, I had, of course, learned all the secrets of making up, and had been famous in the green room for my skill. I took advantage now of my attainments. I painted my face, and to make myself as pitiable as possible, I made a good scar, and fixed one side of my lip in a twist by the aid of a small slip of flesh-coloured plaster. Then, with a red-headed hair, and an appropriate dress, I took to my station in the business